That night, everyone was chasing love, except her. She didn't believe in it anymore, not after everything she had seen. Near the old water trough, an elderly woman stood alone, lost, confused, forgotten. People walked past her. No one stopped, except Lena. And in that one small moment, she made a choice that would change everything. A late autumn night settled over Silver Creek. The moon cast in pale silver across dusty streets while distant fiddle music drifted through the cold, dry air. Lena Brooks walked alone along the edge of town, her boots pressing softly into the packed earth as laughter and music spilled out from the saloon behind her. Lantern light flickered through the wooden doors, shadows moving in rhythm with the dancing inside. It was the kind of night meant for connection, for people to gather, to choose, to belong. But Lena kept walking. She was 27, tall and lean, her movement steady, almost deliberate, as if every step she took had already been decided long before this night. Her dark brown hair was tied loosely at the back, strands slipping free and brushing against her cheek in the wind. Her skin carried the faint warmth of sun and work, but her gray-blue eyes held something cooler. Distance, quiet, control. People in Silver Creek knew her as capable, reliable, but never close, never fully open, and that was how she preferred it. The music behind her swelled briefly, a burst of laughter cutting through the air, and for a moment she slowed, just slightly, not enough to turn back, only enough to feel the edge of something she had long since stopped reaching for. Love, to her, had never been soft. It had been something else entirely. Something that took more than it gave. Something that slowly turned people into shadows of who they once were. She had seen it happen, up close, too close. So she walked away from it. Again. The sound of water reached her before the sight did, a hollow splash, steady and low. At the center of the square stood the old water trough, a long, weathered structure carved from thick wood and reinforced with iron bands. Horses were usually tied nearby during the day, their hooves grinding the dirt into uneven patterns, but at night it stood mostly empty, catching moonlight along its still surface. That was where she saw her. An old woman stood beside it, unmoving. She was thin, almost fragile in the way her frame seemed to fold into itself, wrapped in a faded brown shawl that did little to protect her from the cold. Her silver hair was loosely gathered, strands falling freely, catching the pale light. She wasn't looking at anything in particular, just staring ahead, as if waiting for something that never came. People passed her. A couple brushed by without a glance. A man leading his horse looked once, then looked away. No one stopped. Lena did, not all at once. First, her steps slowed, then her gaze lingered. There was something in the way the woman stood, not begging, not reaching out, just there, lost but quiet about it. That kind of stillness didn't come from weakness. It came from something else, something deeper. Lena could keep walking. No one would question it. No one would expect anything different. For a moment, she almost did. Then the woman shifted slightly, her hand brushing the edge of the trough as if to steady herself. And Lena felt it. That pull, subtle but undeniable. She stepped off the path. The dirt crunched softly beneath her boots as she approached. Up close, the cold was more visible. The woman's hands trembled faintly, her fingers pale against the worn wood. Her breathing was shallow, uneven, not from fear, but from disorientation. "Ma'am," Lena said gently. The woman turned, startled, as if the world had suddenly suddenly come back into focus. Her eyes were pale blue, clouded, searching. She began, her voice thin, uncertain. I don't know where I am. Lena's chest tightened, not with panic, with recognition. What's your name? Lena asked. The woman blinked. Her lips parted slightly, as though the answer should have been easy. Then her expression faltered. I can't remember. The words settled heavily between them. Behind them, the music continued. Laughter, voices, life moving forward. But here, beside the trough, time seemed to slow. You shouldn't be out here, Lena said quietly. It's too cold. The woman didn't argue. She simply looked at Lena, her expression open, almost vulnerable in a way that asked for nothing and everything at once. What happens now? Lena felt the question without hearing it, felt the choice before it was spoken, walk away or stay. She exhaled slowly, then reached out. Come with me, she said. The woman hesitated only for a moment before placing her hand in Lena's. Her skin was cold, but her grip steady. Lena guided her away from the square, away from the light and noise of the saloon, into the quieter edges of town where the night felt heavier, more real. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. By the time they reached Lena's small wooden cabin at the edge of Silver Creek, the world behind them had already begun to fade. The music was gone, the voices distant, the choice already made. Lena opened the door. Warmth spilled out, and without realizing it, everything had just begun. The morning came quietly, pale light slipping through the thin curtains of Lena's cabin, carrying with it the stillness that only small towns knew after a long night of noise. Lena woke before the sun had fully risen, as she always did. Habit more than necessity. For a moment, she lay still, staring at the ceiling, listening. The world outside was calm again. No music, no laughter. Just the distant rustle of wind through dry leaves and the faint creak of wood settling in the cold. Then she remembered. She turned her head. The old woman was still there, resting on the narrow bed by the wall, wrapped in blankets Lena had layered through the night. Her breathing was shallow but steady, her face softer now, less strained than it had been in the square. Lena sat up slowly, careful not to make noise. Something about the presence of another person in her space felt unfamiliar. Not unwelcome, just unfamiliar. Her cabin had always been quiet, predictable, untouched by anything she hadn't chosen. Now that had changed. She stood and moved to the stove, lighting the fire with practiced ease. The smell of burning wood filled the room, grounding, familiar. She poured water into a small kettle, her movement steady, controlled, the same way she handled everything in her life. Behind her, the bed shifted. "You're awake," Lena said without turning. A pause. "Yes, I think so." The woman's voice was clearer than the night before, though still uncertain, like someone testing each word before letting it go. Lena turned then. Up close in daylight, the woman looked older than she had under the moon. Fine lines traced across her face, not harsh, but deep enough to suggest a life that had not been easy. Her skin was pale, almost translucent in places, marked with age but not frailty. There was something resilient beneath it all, something that hadn't faded. Her eyes, though, were the same, still searching. "Do you remember anything?" Lena asked, keeping her tone neutral. The woman sat up slowly, wincing just slightly as she adjusted to the movement. She looked down at her hands, turning them over as if they might tell her something. "I remember," she began, then stopped. Her brow furrowed. "There were mountains, I think." She closed her eyes briefly. "And a house? Large, made of stone." Lena said nothing, letting her continue. "And a boy." The woman's voice softened. "Not a boy. A man now, I suppose. Dark hair. He was strong." A faint, almost invisible smile touched her lips. "But he looked lonely." The room fell quiet again. "Do you remember his name?" Lena asked. The woman shook her head. "No." That was all. Fragments without anchors, memories without meaning. Lena nodded once as if confirming something to herself rather than to the woman. "Then we'll start simple," she said. "You need a name." The woman looked at her, unsure. "I can't keep calling you ma'am forever." A faint flicker of something, almost amusement, passed through the woman's expression. "What would you call me?" she asked. Lena considered for a moment. Not long. Evelyn. The name felt right, soft, but steady, like it belonged to someone who had endured. The woman repeated it quietly. "Evelyn?" Then she nodded. "All right." The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm. Lena worked during cashier in the mornings, tending to small tasks around her property, fixing a loose fence, gathering supplies, checking on the few chickens she kept behind the cabin. Her dog, Rusty, a 6-year-old shepherd mix with a thick reddish coat and intelligent amber eyes, stayed close by her side. He had the alert posture of a working dog, loyal and observant. But he softened around Evelyn, moving slower, calmer, as if he understood she needed gentleness. Evelyn stayed inside at first, adjusting to the space, to herself. Lena showed her simple things, where the water was kept, how to tend the fire, how to move through the small cabin without strain. Evelyn learned quickly, not with confidence but with quiet determination. Even without her memories, something in her still knew how to function, how to adapt. In the afternoons, Lena would sit with her, not asking questions, just being there. Sometimes Evelyn spoke, small details, flashes of something that almost made sense, a staircase, a long table, the sound of wind against stone walls, but nothing ever connected. Nothing formed a complete picture. And Lena never pushed. She had learned long ago that forcing answers rarely brought truth. By the third day, the town had begun to notice. Silver Creek was small. Nothing stayed private for long. Lena felt it first at the general store. While at the hill, the store owner stood behind the counter as she always did, broad-shouldered, in her late 50s, with graying hair pulled tightly into a bun and sharp brown eyes that missed very little. She had lived in Silver Creek her entire life and carried herself with the authority of someone who had seen everything twice. "You've got a guest," Martha said as Lena approached, her tone casual but her gaze direct. Lena set her items down. "For a few days." Martha raised an eyebrow. "That what we're calling chawing it?" There was no malice in her voice, just curiosity. And something else. Concern, maybe. "She needed help," Lena replied simply. Martha studied her for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "Just don't forget about yourself in the process." Lena didn't answer. She didn't need to. The whispers followed her out, at the water pump, near the stables, outside the town hall. She skipped the festival. All that, for a stranger. Doesn't make sense. Lena heard it, every word, but none of it stayed with her, because each night when she returned home, the cabin was no longer empty. There was movement, warmth, a second presence that didn't demand anything from her, didn't expect her to become something else. And that, more than anything, felt right. That evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the land, Lena stood outside the cabin, watching the horizon. Rusty sat beside her, ears alert. Behind her, the door opened softly. Evelyn stepped out, slower than before, but steadier. They stood there together in silence. Two people, both carrying pieces of lives they hadn't fully spoken, neither asking for more. And without realizing it, Lena had already made her choice. Morning broke differently over Dawson Ridge, the light sharper, harsher, cutting across wide stretches of land that seemed to belong to no one, except they did. Caleb Dawson stood near the fence line, watching the horizon as if it owed him answers. He was a tall man, easily over 6 feet, with a broad, solid build shaped by years of physical labor rather than vanity. His dark hair fell just past his collar, unkempt but not careless, and a short, rough beard framed a face discerned by sharp angles, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes that seemed permanently narrowed, as though always measuring the world around him. There was a scar just beneath his left eye, faint but visible, the result of a skirmish years ago that had nearly cost him more than he was willing to remember. People said it was the moment he changed. Less patient, more controlled, harder to reach. To most, Caleb was not just a ranch owner. He was a force. The one people turned to when things went wrong and the one they avoided when they didn't want questions asked. He had built everything here from chaos, piece by piece, after his father's death left the land fractured and vulnerable, and he had done it without hesitation. But there was one thing he had never been able to fix, one thing that never settled. 3 years ago, his mother vanished. No body, no trail, just the wreckage of a carriage and the kind of silence that followed something final. Caleb had searched until there was nothing left to search, and still he hadn't stopped. "Sir?" The voice came from behind him. Caleb didn't turn immediately. He knew who it was. Thomas Reed approached with steady steps, his posture straight but not rigid. He was in his early 30s, a few years younger than Caleb, with sandy brown hair and a neatly trimmed beard that softened the otherwise serious lines of his face. Thomas wasn't as imposing physically, but there was a quiet reliability in the way he carried himself. Someone who had seen enough hardship to understand the value of restraint. He had served alongside Caleb during the worst years, when the land was still unstable, and that shared past had shaped him into someone who spoke carefully and acted with intention. "We've got something," Thomas said. That was enough to make Caleb turn. "What kind of something?" Thomas hesitated, not out of uncertainty but because he understood what this meant. "A report from the western route, a small town called Silver Creek." Caleb's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. "Go on." "An older woman, silver hair, no memory. Been staying there for a few days now." Thomas paused. "The description matches." Silence stretched between them. Not doubt, not hope. Something in between. "How certain?" Caleb asked. Thomas met his gaze. "Not certain enough to ignore." That was all Caleb needed. "Get the horses ready." The journey began before noon. They rode hard. No unnecessary stops, no wasted time. The land blurred past them, dry fields, narrow trails, stretches of open sky that felt endless and empty at the same time. Caleb didn't speak much during the ride. He rarely did. But this time the silence felt different, tighter, like something pressing against the edges of his control. Hope was a dangerous thing. He had learned that the hard way. The first year after she disappeared, he had followed every lead, every rumor, every faint trace that could have meant something. Each one ended the same way, nothing. By the second year, the leads became fewer. By the third, almost none at all. And yet, here he was, still riding, still searching, because stopping would mean accepting something he refused to accept. They reached Silver Creek at dawn. The town was quiet, just beginning to stir. A few early risers moved along the main street, pausing when they saw the riders enter. Caleb didn't slow down. His presence alone was enough to shift the air. Conversation stopped. Eyes followed. He dismounted near the center of town. "Find out where," he said. Thomas nodded and moved off without another word. It didn't take long. A place like this didn't hold secrets well. "Edge of town," Thomas said upon returning. "Small cabin. Belongs to a woman named Lena Brooks." Caleb didn't respond. He was already moving. The cabin was exactly as described. Small, simple, smoke rising faintly from the chimney. Nothing about it suggested anything extraordinary. And yet, Caleb stopped just short of the door. For the first time since the ride began, he hesitated. Not because of fear, because of the possibility. If it wasn't her, this would be just another dead end. If it was... He didn't finish the thought. He raised his hand and knocked. Once, then again. The door opened. A woman stood there, Lena Brooks. She was taller than he expected, her posture straight, her expression calm but guarded. Her dark hair was tied back loosely, and her eyes, clear, steady, met his without hesitation. There was no fear in them, no recognition either, just awareness. "Can I help you?" she asked. Caleb studied her for a brief moment, measured, then spoke. "I'm looking for someone." Her expression shifted slightly, not alarmed, but protective. "Who?" "An older woman, silver hair." A pause. "She's resting," Lena said. "She's not well." Caleb's jaw tightened. "She might be my mother." The words didn't come easily, but they came. Something changed in Lena's eyes then, not belief, not yet, but understanding. She stepped aside. "Come in," she said, quietly. The cabin felt smaller from the inside, warmer, lived in. Caleb moved through it slowly, his presence filling the space in a way that didn't quite belong there. Lena led him to a partially open door. "She's in here." Caleb didn't move immediately, then he stepped forward. The room was dim. The figure on the bed shifted slightly. Silver hair spread across the pillow. Familiar. Too familiar. Caleb felt something break before he even reached her. He crossed the room in 2 steps, dropped to his knees. "Mom." The word came out rough, unsteady. The woman opened her eyes. For a moment, there was nothing, just confusion. Then, recognition. "My boy." And just like that, 3 years of searching ended in a single breath. The road back to Dawson Ridge stretched long and uneven, cutting through dry plains and narrow mountain paths where the wind carried a colder edge the higher they climbed. Lena sat quietly on horseback, her posture steady but her mind anything but. The world around her felt unfamiliar now, Not because it had changed, but because she had stepped beyond the edges of the life she understood. Behind her, Silver Creek was already fading into memory. Ahead of her was something she had never planned for. Evelyn rode beside her, wrapped carefully in a heavier coat Caleb had provided. The older woman seemed calmer now, her movements less uncertain, though the gaps in her memory remained. Every so often, she would glance toward Caleb, as if trying to anchor herself to something she recognized but could not fully recall. There was comfort there, but also confusion. Caleb rode slightly ahead, his presence unmistakable even in silence. He did not speak much during the journey. When he did, his words were brief, direct, controlled. But Lena noticed the way he watched his mother, not constantly, not obviously, but often enough to reveal something deeper beneath his hardened exterior. And once or twice, he looked at her, not long, just enough to make her aware of it. That awareness unsettled her more than she expected. Dawson Ridge came into view near sunset. It was not just a ranch, it was a system. Wide fields stretched across the land dotted with barns, fencing, and groups of workers moving with purpose. Horses moved in coordinated lines, smoke rose from multiple chimneys. Everything functioned with a kind of efficiency Lena had never seen before. This wasn't a home, it was control built into structure. As they approached, people began to notice. Work slowed, conversations quieted, and then they saw Caleb. Respect shifted through the air almost instantly, subtle but undeniable. Heads nodded, movements adjusted. No one questioned his presence, but their eyes didn't stay on him. They moved to Evelyn, then to Lena. Curiosity followed. A woman stepped forward near the main house. Clara Whitmore, the housekeeper, was in her early 40s, tall and composed, with dark auburn hair pinned neatly at the back of her head. Her skin was pale, her features sharp but not unkind, and her posture reflected years of maintaining order in a place where chaos was always just beneath the surface. She wore simple, clean clothing, but there was a quiet authority in the way she stood, someone who understood her role and executed it without hesitation. "Mr. Dawson," she said, her voice calm but respectful. "We weren't expecting—" "I found her," Caleb interrupted. That was all. Clara's expression changed instantly. Her eyes moved to Evelyn, widening just slightly, not with shock but with recognition of the moment's weight. "Of course," she said. "We'll prepare a room immediately." Then her gaze shifted to Lena, measured, curious, not unkind. "And this is—" "Lena," Caleb said simply. "She stays." Clara nodded once. That was enough for her. Inside, the main house was far larger than anything Lena had ever stepped into. High ceilings, wide hallways, solid wood furniture built for durability rather than decoration. It felt less like luxury and more like permanence, something designed to last, not impress. Evelyn was taken upstairs carefully, attended by Clara and another worker. Lena remained near the entrance, uncertain for the first time since leaving Silver Creek. This place didn't need her. It functioned perfectly well without her. And yet, she was here. "You can leave if you want." Caleb's voice came from behind her. She turned. He stood a few steps away, arms relaxed at his sides, his expression unreadable. "No one's forcing you to stay." Lena studied him for a moment. "You are," she said quietly, a slight shift in his posture. "How?" "By bringing her here," Lena replied. "You know I wouldn't leave her." Caleb didn't deny it. A faint exhale. "Then stay," he said. On your terms. That was new. Lena didn't respond right away, but she didn't leave. The following days unfolded differently than she expected. At first, Lena remained close to Evelyn, helping her adjust, guiding her through the unfamiliar space. But it didn't take long before her presence extended beyond that. A worker came in with a hand injury, deep cut, poorly treated. Lena handled it without hesitation. Another fell ill. She stayed beside them through the night. Word spread quickly, not as gossip this time, as something else, reliability. People began to come to her, carefully at first, then more openly. She didn't ask questions about their lives. She didn't need to. She treated what was in front of her. That was enough. Caleb watched, not from a distance, but without interfering. He noticed the way people responded to her, how their tension eased, how they spoke more openly, how they trusted her without fully understanding why. This place had always functioned on order, on rules, on strength. But Lena brought something else, something quieter, something that didn't force anything, yet still changed it. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the fields, Caleb found her outside near the far fence line. Rusty sat beside her, calm as ever. "You've settled in," he said. Lena didn't look at him immediately. "I didn't plan to. Most things worth staying for aren't planned." She glanced at him then. There was no challenge in her expression, no resistance, just thought. "You built all this," she said, looking out over the land. "Yes, and yet it still feels—" She paused, searching for the word. "Tense." Caleb didn't react right away, because she wasn't wrong. "This place was built to survive," he said finally, "not to feel comfortable." Lena nodded slowly. "I can tell." They stood there in silence for a moment, not uncomfortable, just present. And somewhere in that quiet, something began to shift. Not dramatically, not visibly, but enough. Lena had stepped into a world she didn't belong to, and somehow she was beginning to change it. Winter came early to Dawson Ridge, the cold settling deep into the land as if it intended to stay. Frost clung to the fences, the fields hardened, and the air carried a stillness that felt heavier than usual, like something waiting just beneath the surface. Lena had grown used to the rhythm of the place, but that morning felt different. It wasn't something she could name. Just a quiet tension that lingered in the way people moved, and the way conversation stopped a little too quickly when someone new stepped into view. Rusty stayed closer to her than usual. That alone told her enough. Dogs noticed things before people did. By midday, the unease had spread. Workers gathered in smaller groups. Guards checked the perimeter more often. Even Clara's movements were sharper, more deliberate, her calm demeanor carrying an edge Lena hadn't seen before. Something had shifted, and Caleb knew it. He stood in the main yard, speaking with a man Lena hadn't seen before. Harlan Pike was broad-shouldered and thick-necked, with a heavy beard that showed more gray than black. His face was weathered, lined by years of hard living, and one eye sat slightly lower than the other, a result of an old injury that had never healed properly. He carried himself with a kind of rigid alertness, the posture of someone who had survived too many close calls to ever fully relax. Harlan was not part of the regular crew. He was the kind of man Caleb only called when things were about to turn dangerous. "They've been seen near the North Ridge," Harlan said, his voice low and gravelly. "Not passing through, watching. Caleb's expression didn't change. How many? Hard to say. Enough. That was all it took. Lena didn't approach them. She didn't need to. She already understood. This wasn't random. This was connected to Evelyn, to the past Caleb never spoke about. That night, the wind picked up, cold, sharp, carrying with it the kind of silence that made every sound feel louder than it should. Lena stayed inside with Evelyn, helping her settle as the older woman's restlessness grew. Even without her memories fully restored, something in her seemed to recognize the danger. "I feel like," Evelyn whispered, her fingers tightening slightly around the edge of the blanket, "like something is coming back." Lena sat beside her, not correcting, not reassuring, just there. "I'm here," she said quietly. That was enough. Outside, the ranch had shifted into something else. Not a home, a defense. Men moved along the perimeter. Lamps were dimmed. Horses were kept close. Every detail tightened, controlled. Caleb moved through it all without hesitation. This was a world he understood. The first sound came just past midnight. A distant crack, then another. Gunfire. Everything happened at once. Voices, shouting, movement. The fragile stillness of the night shattered in seconds. Lena stood immediately. Rusty was already at the door, body tense, low growl rumbling from his chest. Evelyn sat upright, her breathing quick, eyes wide. "What is it?" she asked. Lena didn't answer, because she already knew. The door burst open. One of the workers, young, pale, shaken, stood there. "They're inside the outer fence," he said. "They're coming this way." Lena's mind didn't race. It narrowed, focused. There was no time to think about fear, only action. She helped Evelyn stand, slow, careful. But before they could move further, footsteps, closer, too close. A man appeared in the doorway, not one of theirs. His face was partially covered, but his eyes were clear, cold, deliberate. He wasn't there by accident. He knew exactly where to go. Evelyn froze. Something in her expression shifted. Recognition, not of the man, of the moment. "Stay behind me," Lena said. It wasn't loud, but it was firm. The man stepped forward, one movement. Fast, direct, and Lena moved. Not because she planned to, because she didn't think. She stepped between them. The blade came down. A flash of movement. A sharp, sudden impact. Pain. Lena didn't fall immediately. Her body held for a second longer than it should have. Then the weight of it caught up. The room shifted. Sound blurred. A hand grabbed the attacker from behind. Hard. Violent. Caleb. He didn't speak. Didn't hesitate. He slammed the man against the wall with enough force to shake the structure. For a moment, there was only rage. Raw. Uncontrolled. Then, he saw her. Lena, barely steady, one hand pressed against her shoulder where blood had begun to seep through the fabric. Alive. Still standing. Something changed. Not the anger, but what he chose to do with it. "Take him," Caleb said, his voice low, controlled in a way that felt more dangerous than shouting. Harlan and two others stepped in immediately, dragging the man away. The room quieted. But not completely, because the aftermath lingered. Caleb moved toward Lena, slower now, careful, as if anything sudden might break something that couldn't be fixed. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, but there was no anger in it, only something else, something heavier. Lena exhaled slowly. She was in front of me. That was all. No explanation, no justification, just truth. And in that moment, Caleb understood something he hadn't allowed himself to before. This wasn't about control or protection or keeping people safe by holding them back. It was about choice. After that night, everything shifted. The attack was traced back. The men responsible were not outsiders, not entirely. They were connected to the past Caleb had tried to bury, people who had never accepted the order he built, who saw Evelyn as leverage and Lena as weakness. They were dealt with, not through chaos, through structure, through consequence. And the ranch changed, not in how it looked, but in how it functioned. Stronger, safer, more aware. Lena stayed. No one asked her to. No one needed to. Years later, when autumn returned to Silver Creek, the world felt quieter in a different way. Not empty, not distant, just settled. And if anyone ever asked what changed everything, the answer was never complicated. It started with a single choice on a cold night when someone stopped walking and decided to stay. Sometimes, life doesn't change in the big moments. It changes in the quiet ones. When you choose to care when no one is watching. Maybe that's how God works, not through noise, but through small, unseen choices. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. God bless you.